in the mood for good news today? Anybody? No? Okay. I guess I can yell at you again if you want. That's all right too. You know, because sometimes we've been going through the book of Judges, or we went through the book of Judges last week, and man, I'll tell you what, I feel sometimes when you leave, it's just like, man, everything is bad. And you leave being a bit discouraged. But today, we are going to look at something that is so, to me, incredibly encouraging, because it's kind of a parenthetical story inside of a story. It's good to see that there are good things that happen even in the midst of bad times, right? I mean, think about America. We've got a really messed up country, and yet inside of it, God is still working. There's some really good things happening. You know, if you go to a jewelry store and you want to buy a really expensive diamond or necklace or bracelet or something, the jeweler will always take that precious piece of jewelry and he'll put behind it some really black, dark velvet, background. So it just makes that diamond pop. It looks so much better in the black background. And sometimes there are stories in Scripture that God just puts in front of a black background, and it just makes it absolutely pop. When you go outside at night and it's a clear sky and there's no moon and it's totally dark, that's when the stars really shine. And sometimes God shows us incredible favor and great grace in the midst of a very crooked and perverse generation. In the book of Judges, we looked at that last week, and the theme, remember, at the end, it said, in those days there was no king in Israel, and everybody did what was right in their own eyes. And chaos ensued. And in the midst of this chaos, there is this beautiful story. Now, you could read the book of Ruth if you'd like to. It's in the Bible. It's right after Judges. It'll take you about 15 minutes to read it, or I could take about an hour to tell you about it. So I'm going to take about an hour to tell you about the book of Ruth, to fill in some of the things that maybe aren't there. So you go home and read it and see if I missed anything. But man, inside of this book, it is absolutely beautiful. So let me begin by telling you about Ruth. Actually, let me start by talking about a man named Elimelech. Elimelech was the father in this story. He was the man in the story. He was married to a woman named Naomi. Elimelech's name literally means God is my king. That God is the Lord of my life. I will do what he wants me to do. That's what his mommy and daddy named him for, so that he would follow God with all of his heart. His wife's name was Naomi. Naomi's name means delightful, blessed, full. And it seems like at the beginning of this story, that was absolutely true for both of them. They lived in Israel. They were people of God, under the covenant of God, living in the promised land. But in the book of Judges, it talks about how when the people didn't listen to God, things would happen. Curses would be thrown out. He would do damage to his own people and their own land. And inside of the book of Judges, one of these particular catastrophes is happening. And in Bethlehem, there is a drought. There is a famine. And people are beginning to feel it. And this man named Elimelech, who says, God is my king, he took Naomi, who is delightful and blessed and full, and their two sons, and left Bethlehem and went to a place called Moab. Now, we've talked about Moab, right? Last week, we talked about Moab. Remember Eglon, king of Moab? The big fat king when the Ehud stabbed him and everything came out. Remember that? I'll never forget it. It's a great story. It's amazing. Go read it for yourself. But anyway, Eglon was the king of Moab. They were idol worshipers. There was a curse placed on them because of the beginning of them. Actually, if you didn't know this, the beginning of Moab's whole nation began when Lot's daughters, Lot, lived in Sodom and Gomorrah. After they escaped Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot's daughters were afraid that they wouldn't have babies, and so they got their dad drunk, had sex with him, and had babies from their dad. It's disgusting. It's incest. That was the beginning of the Moabite people. Very beginning, they're under a curse. The Moabite women seduced the children of Israel, the men in Israel, remember, and made them worship other gods. And God cursed this people. In fact, there was a 10-generation curse placed on Moab. And some scholars say that Ruth was actually on the 11th generation. So it's as if God's curse is being lifted, and God is going to do an absolute amazing thing in Ruth's life. But you haven't met her yet. So Elimelech brings his family, his wife and 2 boys, into Moab. And I don't know how long after that, sometime after that, Elimelech died, leaving Naomi as a widow. But at least she has 2 sons, right? And they married 2 Moabite women. One was named Orpah, and the other was named Ruth. Well, they lived there for about 10 years, and we're not exactly sure when, but these 2 boys also died. So you've got Naomi and Orpah and Ruth, 3 heartbroken widows. Naomi is absolutely crushed by this. I mean, she was a woman who was full and blessed and delightful, and she married a man who was, the Lord was his God, and they walked away, and they sold their land in Bethlehem, and they lived among idol worshipers and lost everything, including husband and wife and sons. So Naomi decides, I'm going back. I've heard that the curse has been lifted from Israel, that Bethlehem is doing well and they're harvesting some grain. And so maybe I can go back. Maybe somebody will show me kindness. I don't know how that's going to happen, but I have got to go back. And as she leaves town, her 2 daughters-in-law, they follow her. And they're going to go with her. And she says, don't come with me. You guys stay here. You start over again. You're young enough. I'm an old lady, and I'm going to go back and just die in misery. But you start a life over again. Find another man. And Orpah said, okay, I will. And she walked away. She was heartbroken as well, but she knew what was familiar. She didn't want to leave her family, the things that she knew, so she stayed there. But not Ruth. Ruth clung to Naomi and said this, don't urge me to leave. Don't turn me back. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and my God, your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me ever so severely if even death separates you and me. And when Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped arguing. And what you hear here is you hear the words of a confession that's saying, I want to leave the Moabite idols. I want to leave that way of life. And even though, Naomi, things have gone bad for you, something I saw in your life, and you're returning to that God. I want that God to be my God. What you're seeing here is Ruth's conversion. It's a hard way to go, but she's going to go that way because it's the truth, and she's going to follow it. There was once a preacher who was preparing a sermon in a coffee shop. And as he sat to prepare the sermon, he had his Bible open and he had his notes there. And nobody was really in the coffee shop. And then this little Chinese girl walked in and she saw this man's Bible. And she said in her broken English, "Are you a Christian?" And he said, "I am." "Are you a Christian?" She said, "I am." And he said, "How did you become a Christian in China? How did you become a Christian in China? That's really rare." And she answered by saying this, "I enter through narrow way. I enter through narrow way. I knew it would be hard. I knew I may lose everything, even my life, but I wanted Jesus Christ, and I entered the narrow way." And what Ruth is doing is Ruth is entering through the narrow way, saying goodbye to everything that she used to hold dear and looking forward to what is to come. And so the two women, they make their way to Bethlehem. I mean, imagine this scene. Naomi went away happy and full and blessed with husband and sons. And she comes back with one woman who's not even an Israelite, a Moabite. How are they going to respond? I mean, they were coming to a small town. Bethlehem was probably 300 people at the time. I mean, those of us who live in small towns, we know what that's like, right? You can't sneeze without the other side of town wondering if you've got a cold. I mean, it's terrible. Everybody knows your business. It's crazy. And when they come into town after being gone for such a long time, this is what Scripture says. Ruth 2:19, it says, when they arrived in Bethlehem, the town was stirred. Is that crazy or what? One person comes to town and it's just mayhem. When they came into town, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women exclaimed, can this be Naomi? Don't call me Naomi, she said. Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. You wouldn't have even recognized Naomi. She's not the same person. She's devastated by loss. She's brokenhearted. She is not understanding everything that's going on. And that'll change a person, won't it? I think I've told you before about my Aunt Ruth. I remember one day I was going through some photos at our home and I came upon this picture of this young, beautiful girl. I'd never seen her before. I said, Mom, who is this? She said, that's your Aunt Ruth. I said, no, it's not. I know my Aunt Ruth. This woman is good looking and she seems pretty happy. Aunt Ruth is a short, ugly, mean-spirited woman. That is not her. I said, what happened to Aunt Ruth? And Mom said, life happened to Aunt Ruth. And she told me her story. Wow. I looked differently at Aunt Ruth and was sad for the fact that this beautiful young girl had grown into such an ugly person. Not just physically, but just her whole world had crushed. I think about Naomi when I think about Ruth, my Aunt Jean. Did I call her Ruth? Yeah. She's Aunt Jean, okay? Don't tell her I screwed that up. I also had an Aunt Ruth, but we don't want to go there. So anyway, I think about her when I think about Jean, because I know what that looks like. But here's what I want you to understand, okay? I want you to understand this is not an ignorant woman who is just shaking her fist at God, who doesn't understand him. She's a woman who understands the expense of sin in her own life and that God is just. She's not saying he did this for no reason. She's saying, I walked away. I deliberately disobeyed him. And because he's just, because he's holy, because he loves me, he has caused my life to become a wreck. Most people don't ever want to hear that. We say stuff like, oh, God would never allow that to happen in your life. Really? Do you really believe that? There are consequences to choices that we make. And Naomi is facing one of these consequences. She's not denying God. It doesn't even say she's angry with him. She's just saying, this is what's happening to me, and it hurts, and I don't like it, and I want it to go away. And what I need more than anything is somebody to show me some love. Somebody grant me grace that I don't deserve. I need mercy, and I've come back home seeking it. Maybe I can find it here. She's just being honest. She's like David in Psalm 13, who says, how long? How long, Lord? Will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemies triumph over me? Look on me and answer, Lord, my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death. And my enemy will say, I have overcome him, and my foes will rejoice when I fall. But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices at your salvation. I will sing to the Lord praise, for he has been good to me. Oh, David's not schizophrenic. David is saying, my life is hurting, but I know God is loving. Proverbs 3:11 says, my son, do not make light of the Lord's discipline. And do not lose heart when he rebukes you, because the Lord disciplines the ones he loves, and he chastens everyone he accepts as his son. Naomi is simply experiencing some discipline from God that is bringing her back into the fold. And she's crying out to God, I fall on your mercy, God. And so they got back to Bethlehem. And Naomi's not sure exactly what's going to happen. But Ruth is very industrious. And she said, hey, it's the barley harvest. I know that what you guys do here is you have harvesters that leave the outsides of the fields unharvested so that people can go and glean. Those who can't afford any food or don't have jobs. So is it okay with you, Naomi, if I go out and I glean in somebody's field? And Naomi said, yeah, go for it. And here we begin to see the sovereignty of God in action. Ruth goes out into a field, just any old field. She doesn't know anybody. Maybe the first field she comes upon, and she starts to pick up what the harvesters have left over so that they can have a meal tonight. And as she's harvesting, she's doing a great job. She's getting as much as she can. She's actually impressing the workers who are there. And then enters a man named Boaz. Oh, Boaz. Guys, you ought to name your sons Boaz, because he is the hero of the story. Boaz is a wealthy man. Boaz is a good man. And Boaz is a godly man. He's incredible. And so Boaz walks on the scene, and he looks around, and he sees a stranger in his land. And he greets his workers. This is how he greets his workers. He says, the Lord bless you. Isn't that amazing? This is how the boss walks into the factory. The Lord bless you. And their response, and the Lord bless you too. What a great working environment. And then he says, who's that girl out there? See, he took one look at Ruth, and the Holy Spirit put these words in his mouth. Hubba hubba. He looked at her like, man, who is she? Doesn't look like any of our other women. Who is this girl? And the guys are like, oh, that's the Moabite woman. You know, the one that came in with Naomi. I think her name's Ruth. And so Boaz makes his way down to Ruth, introduces himself, and says to her, hey, listen, stay in my field. You can have as much as you want. I would suggest that you don't go to another field. We will not abuse you here, because who knew what would happen out there? Every man was doing what was right in their own eyes. You stay in my field. You get thirsty, go get a drink. Take yourself into this place. And Ruth's response was, I don't understand. How can you be so kind to me? Who am I to you that you would bless me so much? And he said, I know who you are. And I know how you've taken care of Naomi. And I just want to bless you for being a blessing. And she bowed down on the ground. And she just was grateful for that. And she continued to work in the fields. And later that afternoon, Boaz waves her, hey, Ruth, Come on, eat lunch with us. Just join us. You know, you're not an outsider. Come on in. Just eat with us. And so there's Ruth eating with everybody else. And she gets this massive, meal, and she's enjoying it. And here's her response. She eats what she can, but because she doesn't know where the next meal's coming from, she literally takes the leftovers and kind of stuffs them in her pocket to bring them back home to Naomi. I mean, she was so cautious. She didn't know where the next meal would come from. And after she had gone back to work, he told his harvesters, he said, listen, don't abuse her. You let her get whatever she needs. In fact, leave some of the grain down. Let her take it. We need to take care of this woman. Now, here's my question. Why? Why would Boaz be so kind to a Moabite woman? Is he just a good guy? I would like to suggest that Boaz knew what it was like to be a foreigner in another land. If you look at the genealogies of Boaz, do you know who Boaz's mama was? Boaz's mama was Rahab. Do you remember who Rahab is? Rahab was the Canaanite woman in Jericho who let the spies in and said, I want to follow you guys. I don't want to die here. We believe that your God is the God that we ought to serve. Please rescue me. She's the one that rescued the spies, who showed herself to be authentic by putting that red cord in her window, and she was saved by Israel from sure destruction. And so what I think Boaz saw a mother who had been treated with unconditional grace. A whole country had welcomed her in, treated her right. He learned from that. When he saw grace, he gave it away. And it could also be that Boaz understood what it was like to be a half-breed in a country of purebreds. Those sideways glances, those people calling him names because he wasn't fully Jewish enough. He knew the pain of bullying. He knew what it felt like. He also saw the grace that was given, and this made him who he was. And when he saw somebody, an outsider, come in, he saw how dangerous it was for her, and he said, I want to treat her right. It's a beautiful picture of grace. Do you know what it's like to be an outsider? Can you imagine what Ruth must have been feeling? I love to tell this story, usually at Christmas time, about a Paul Harvey story that he used to tell, that the way he delivers it is so amazing. I could never do it justice. But he tells a story about a country singer named Lonzo Green. Back in the 1950s, people knew who he was. He was kind of a big deal. And Lonzo Green was coming to this community in Cherry Valley, Arkansas. And everybody was excited that he was coming, but particularly his nephew, Jimmy. Jimmy was like, man, Lonzo's coming. I want everybody to know that Lonzo's coming to our neighborhood. And there was one kid who really wanted to meet Lonzo, but there's no way that his family would ever let him in. That is Jimmy's family. Because he was from the wrong side of the tracks. He wasn't the kind of person that should be in their house. He was white trash. But Jimmy said, hey, he's going to be here, and he's saying this to Lonzo. He's got this old rickety guitar. It's not tuned. He doesn't know how to tune it. He doesn't really know how to play it. He really would love to have some time with you. Well, tell him to come over. He can't come over. Well, then I'll meet him out at the curb. And so Lonzo leaves this house, sits on a curb, and waits for this 15-year-old boy to come. And this little boy kind of sneaks between the trees, very cautiously looks, and finally makes his way to the curb and sits down with Lonzo. And Lonzo takes his guitar and he begins to tune it. He says, nobody ever taught you how to tune your guitar? And he showed him a couple chords, and this boy was just so grateful and thanked him and said, I need to go. And Lonzo said, no, what's your hurry? Just sit down. Let's play a little bit. And that whole day, they just sat there, and Lonzo taught him chords, and they had such a great time, and he just came out of his shell. And it changed this kid's life. And Paul Harvey, he ends this particular story by saying this. He said, and if there is a happy ending mixed with our bittersweet memories, it is this, that boy was never afterward unwelcome again. The young fellow who once upon a time couldn't come inside was Elvis Presley. I love that story. Little Elvis comes in and Lonzo changes his life, and the rest is history. And Boaz is so meaningful to me because I see in him a man who says, I want to care for people who maybe don't deserve to be cared about. This woman is under a curse, but I care. And that woman, Ruth, that evening, Ruth, after getting all of the grain that she could, she literally carried home with her 30 pounds of grain. And Naomi said, how did it go? How was your day? Oh, Naomi, it was amazing. I gleaned in this guy's field. His name was Boaz. Boaz? You're kidding me. I know Boaz. Boaz is a good man. In fact, did you know that Boaz is our kinsman redeemer? What's a kinsman redeemer? Oh, well, he's close in relation to us, and he has the right as a kinsman redeemer to purchase back all of the land that we sold when we left. And he could even marry you. So, Ruth, go back again and again and again. And she went back again and again and again. Through the whole barley harvest, through the whole wheat harvest, she was there. You see, Naomi knew something about Boaz. She knew that he had what it takes to redeem them. If you are a kinsman redeemer, that means that you would have to have some qualifications in order to actually redeem back land and marry particular women. The first thing that you would have to have is the right to redeem. You would have to be a relative in some standing, and he was. You would have to also have the resources to redeem. In other words, you'd have to buy. It'd cost you greatly. He had the resources. He was a very wealthy man. He could purchase back all of that land. And the third thing you had to have is you had to have the resolve to do it. In other words, you got to want it. And we didn't know yet if he had the resolve. We know he's related. We know he's got the resources, but is he going to want to do it? And this is where the story gets so good. A few weeks later, Naomi's like, all right, time to cut to the chase. Get busy, girl. Here we go. You need to go because I know where he's at. Boaz is going to be, winnowing grain over here. And you need to know the time is short. So go take a bath, put on some perfume, get your best clothes on, and you go to where he is. But here's what you need to do, okay? You need to kind of sneak there, okay? He doesn't need to see you. Nobody needs to see you. It's somewhat dangerous anyway. So go to where he's winnowing grain. And I want you to spy out where he's at. And I want you to watch him eat and drink. And when he's finished eating and drinking, go see where he's going to go to sleep. Make sure you know where he's sleeping. You don't want to go to any other man. You want to make sure you know where he's going, okay? So she goes and she kind of hides herself. She sees him winnowing the grain. She sees him eating and drinking and making his way to his bed. And she waits till he's asleep. Because Naomi had said, now when he goes to sleep, you go to his feet and you uncover them. If you're Jewish, you're red-faced right now. I mean, this is scandalous. This is so forward. A girl just doesn't do this. So go to him and uncover his feet and lay at his feet. He'll tell you what to do next. What? That's a scary thought. Okay, I'll do whatever you say. So he's over there. He finally falls asleep. She sneaks up She uncovers his feet and she lays at his feet, doesn't wake him up. So he's sleeping. But then later that night, I don't know what it was. Maybe the breeze on his knees, but something woke him up. And he felt somebody down at his feet. And he's like, who are you? Like, are you one of my guys? What are you doing in my bed? This is ridiculous. And Ruth's like, it's your servant Ruth. And what you don't see, because the Bible doesn't show you, is his eyes went whoop like that. What? Ruth's in my bed? What is the deal? And Naomi said, now he'll take it from there, right? But this is where Ruth begins to kind of take matters into her own hands. She goes up and she says, cover me with the corner of your, whatever, what you're covering yourself with. What she was saying is, Boaz, I'm available. I want you to marry me. She proposes to him. Oh, this is crazy. That's why his eyes are so big. But Boaz, acting like, he's so cool, so coy. He said, oh, okay, just one problem. I know that I am your kinsman redeemer, but I'm not your closest kinsman redeemer. There's another guy. He's closer to you than I am. So here's the deal, Ruth. Just stay here till morning. But before the sun rises, you need to leave because nobody needs to know you're here. We were completely above board. Nothing happened. It just shows the character of Boaz. But no scandal was necessary, so she had to leave before it got light. And in the morning, Ruth, I will go to that kinsman redeemer and I will ask him if he would purchase your land. And if he says he will, then you'll have to marry him. And they just laid there the rest of the night. Can you imagine that? Oh, how's it going to go? Because I'm guaranteeing you Boaz wants this as bad as Ruth does. He's praying, God, make it so, make it so, make it so. And so it all happens. She leaves. She goes back home, probably waiting on pins and needles. Boaz gets up and he makes his way to the city gate and he calls this guy and gathers the 10 elders around. And he says, hey, listen, I know that you are the kinsman redeemer, the closest kinsman redeemer for Naomi. And her land is available. You can buy it back. You have the first rights of refusal. So what are you going to do? He said, okay, I'll take it. But Boaz wasn't done. He said, sorry, one thing I forgot to mention. You see, if you buy the land, you got to marry the Moabite woman. I mean, I'm guessing he said it just like that. It's like, you don't want to marry her, do you? And he's like, oh, okay, I'm out. I'm not going to do it. And he's like, yes. So he goes back and takes Ruth and they become husband and wife. And it's this beautiful story of redemption. I mean, a beautiful story of redemption, not just for Ruth, who is born into this cursed nation, but for Naomi, who had lost everything, had been empty of everything, and now all of that land will be restored to her. All of her, hopes and dreams are coming true. And Boaz and Ruth, they get married, and 9 months later, little baby's born into the family. Naomi's a grandma. She's so excited. I can't believe how God is faithful, that God has done this for us. And they had a little baby. And that's great, isn't it? I mean, just having a little baby. But it's so much more than that, guys. It's not just that the story ends here. Here's the genealogy. Are you ready? Boaz and Ruth had a child, a son named Obed. And Obed, when he grew up, he had a baby named Jesse. And Jesse, when he grew up, he had a little baby named David. King David comes from the line of a Moabite woman. It is unbelievable. God does this incredible miracle. God didn't forget Naomi. God redeemed Naomi. God redeemed this bitter woman into a woman who could own her name again. And Ruth, this woman who was born under this curse, is now in the lineage of David, who is in the lineage of Jesus. If you look at Matthew chapter 1, you see the lineage of Jesus. And you've got Rahab, and you've got Ruth, and you've got Bathsheba, and you've got Tamar. God takes people who are broken, and he welcomes them in. He offers them grace. He allows them to be part of his plan. It's incredible. This is the gospel according to Ruth. Here's how I see it, okay? This is kind of the picture that I get. We all are Elimelech. Every one of us. And from the very beginning, God created us, and at the garden we said, God is my king, and I walk with him in fellowship, but I deliberately walked away, and I live in a foreign land, and my relationship with him is broken. We are all Ruth, who is born into this cursed land. And we are all Naomi, who have become bitter because of the curse. But there is one who is greater than Boaz, who doesn't just restore land to us, but he restores a relationship to us in the relationship with God. And that one greater than Boaz is Jesus Christ. I love the genealogy of Matthew. Listen to it. I'll just read it to you. How many of you, when you get to that, you just skip over it? Most of us do. Matthew chapter 1, starting in verse 5, Salmon, rather unfortunate name, the father of Boaz, who was the mother of Rahab. Boaz, the father of Obed, who was the mother of Ruth. Obed, the father of Jesse, and Jesse, the father of David. And you break it down, go a little bit further to verse 16. And Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary. And Mary was the mother of Jesus, who is called the Messiah. He's in the line. Jesus is the real Boaz. He's the one who's the kinsman redeemer. Jesus would be born like us, in the flesh, tempted in every way, but without sin. He came to his own. He is our kinsman, and he came to redeem us. Do you remember what he said about the kinsman redeemer? 3 qualifications. First of all, the redeemer had to have a right to redeem. Jesus Christ has a right to redeem because he became one of us. We are related in that he was born into this world. He's the Son of Man. He was flesh and blood. He came to that which was his own. That's you and me. He qualifies as our kinsman redeemer because we are related to him. Galatians 4:4 says, but when the time had fully come, God sent his son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who are under the law. It's amazing. He is the one rightful redeemer. Next, we'll see that Jesus has the resource to be our redeemer. There is nobody like him. He said in Matthew 28, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. I have this ability to rescue you, to save you. This man was the one who had authority like nobody else. He has authority over sin. He has authority over sickness and suffering and death. This is the one who will tell the wind and the waves to be still. This is the one who will tell the sick to be healed, the blind to see, the deaf to hear, the lame to walk, the dead to rise again, and the demons to flee. He has authority over all of them. He is absolutely resourced to save us. And I love what Hebrews says. Therefore, he is able to save completely those who come to God through him. He sacrificed for their sins once for all when he offered himself, and not with perishable things such as silver and gold were we redeemed, but with the precious blood of Christ, a lamb without blemish or defect. That's what Peter says. He is resourced. He has enough in him to save us from our sins. It's not a price that's too high. But here's what I think is maybe the best part, and that is that he also has the resolve to save us. He wants to. Isn't that great? Have you ever thought of that? That Jesus Christ, he loves you. He cares about you. He wants to walk in relationship with you. And he has it in himself to say, I want them to know me. I love Philippians 2, and I know I read this all the time, but I'll read it until the day you kick me out of here. Philippians 2 speaks so highly of Jesus because of what he did. Who being in very nature God, he is God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his advantage. In other words, he didn't stay where he was. He could have stayed up in heaven. He could have said, I'm God. I'm not going down there to those people. But he didn't hold on to that. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness and being found in appearance as a man. He humbled himself and became obedient to death. I'm sorry, I should have gone further. I want you to see that. He became obedient to death, even death on a cross. The God of the universe condescended to us, became one of us so that he could pay for our sins to redeem us. He took that wooden cross and he carries it through the streets of Jerusalem after being beaten and whipped and scourged and a crown of thorns on his head and being punched in the face, being falsely accused, being denied, being betrayed. He willingly submitted and he carried that cross up that hill called Calvary, and he deliberately laid down and he let the Roman soldiers take advantage of him and nail his wrists and his feet to that cross, to raise that cross into the ground, to drop it in a hole, to separate his shoulders. In incredible agony, he hung there for 6 hours. And what were the words that came out of his mouth? What did he say on the cross? His words were not curses. The words were, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. Today, you will be with me in paradise. And the last words he spoke, it is finished. Tetelestai, paid in full. He paid that price. He purchased us back. He brought us into a relationship with the Father. He's given us everything back that we lost at the fall because he loves us. He has the right to, he has the resources to, but more importantly, he has the resolve to. He loves you. You think Boaz loved Ruth? Oh, pales in comparison to the love